By early 1944, the clock was ticking. Hitler's forces still held most of Western Europe in an iron grip, and despite victories in Italy and North Africa, the Western Allies needed a decisive strike, one that would break the Nazi line and change the trajectory of the war. That strike would come at Normandy. Operation Overlord wasn't just the largest amphibious invasion in history, it was the most critical gamble the Allies would take. The planning began long before boots hit the beach. Codenamed Overlord, the operation involved meticulous deception, diplomacy, and logistics on an unprecedented scale. The Allies created entire fake armies to confuse German intelligence, most famously General Patton's fictitious 1st U.S. Army Group positioned in southeast England. This elaborate ruse convinced German high command that the invasion would strike at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. And the deception worked. By June 1944, the German 15th Army remained stationed near Calais, waiting for an invasion that would never come. Meanwhile, real Allied forces gathered in southern England. Nearly 3 million troops from the US, Britain, Canada, and Free Europe would participate in what Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower called a Great Crusade. Weather, however, almost undid the plan. High winds and rough seas forced a last-minute delay. On June 5, under cloudy skies, Eisenhower made the call. A brief window of clearer conditions was forecasted for the morning of June 6. The invasion was back on. In the darkness before dawn, Allied paratroopers dropped behind enemy lines. The 82nd and 101st U.S. Airborne Divisions, along with British and Canadian units, faced confusion, misdrops, and fierce resistance. Many landed far from their objectives. But chaos worked in their favor. German commanders couldn't make sense of the scattered reports, delaying their response. As dawn broke, the largest seaborne force in history appeared on the horizon. More than 5,000 vessels, from landing craft to battleships, surged toward the French coast. The 5 chosen beaches, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword, each posed unique challenges. At Omaha, the Americans were met with brutal machine gun fire and impassable terrain. The beach soon earned the grim nickname Bloody Omaha. Despite setbacks, soldiers pressed forward. At Juno, Canadian troops fought house to house. British units at Gold and Sword overcame minefields and concrete bunkers. Naval and air bombardments had softened some defenses, but many strongpoints remained intact. The price of every inch was high. By nightfall, the Allies had landed more than 150,000 troops. The gains were modest, the casualties severe, but the beachheads held. Hitler's Atlantic Wall had been breached. D-Day was not the end. It was the beginning of a long, bloody push into Europe. But it marked a turning point. After years of occupation, Europe now had a foothold of liberation. The initial landings were only the beginning. By the morning of June 7, the Allied presence on the French coast was undeniable, but so was the risk. The Germans had not yet launched a full counterattack, but that would change quickly. For the Allies, the next phase of the operation was just as critical: expand the beachheads, link the 5 landing zones, and prepare for the inevitable German response. At Omaha and Utah, American forces worked to push inland through hedgerows and fortified villages. The terrain of Normandy was a natural defender. Thick bocage, dense hedgerows lined with centuries-old earth mounds, made movement slow and visibility nearly impossible. Every field became a death trap. German defenders used the terrain masterfully, ambushing advancing Allied units with machine guns and anti-tank weapons. British and Canadian troops faced similar resistance at Gold, Juno, and Sword. While they had advanced further on June 6, they now encountered well-positioned German forces near Cannes, a vital city and strategic objective. Hitler had ordered that can be held at all costs, and the SS Panzer divisions were moving in to enforce that command. By June 8, the German 21st Panzer Division had counterattacked near Sword Beach. The Allies repelled it, but not without losses. In other sectors, German tanks, particularly the feared Panthers and Tigers, began arriving in increasing numbers. The Allies had superior numbers, but in close combat, numbers weren't always enough. Air superiority became the decisive factor. Allied aircraft disrupted German reinforcements and supplies, bombing roads, bridges, and convoys relentlessly. While German tanks were powerful, they couldn't reach the front in time or with enough coordination. The Luftwaffe, once dominant in Europe, was largely absent over Normandy. Meanwhile, Allied engineers worked tirelessly to unload reinforcements and equipment. The solution was ingenious: artificial harbors known as mulberries. These prefabricated ports were floated across the channel and assembled off the beaches. By June 9, they were operational, allowing tanks, trucks, and tons of supplies to pour ashore. The coordination between land, air, and sea forces was unprecedented. Every division had its objectives, every unit a timetable. And yet, chaos was constant. Communication errors, shifting battle lines, and the sheer brutality of combat turned plans into improvisation. Still, progress continued. On June 10, the American and British sectors finally linked, creating a unified front stretching across the Normandy coast. Though the gains were measured in miles, they were crucial. Every village secured meant a stronger foothold. Every road cleared meant faster movement inland. And every German counterattack repelled was one step closer to breaking through to open ground. For the Allies, the beachheads were no longer fragile outposts. They were now the launch pads of liberation. But the cost was staggering. Thousands had died, and many more would follow. The battle for Normandy was far from over. What lay ahead would test every soldier's resolve and would shape the course of the war in Europe. By mid-June 1944, the Allied beachheads were firmly established, but the real battle was just beginning. At the center of their plans stood the city of Caen, a major road hub, crucial for both logistics and momentum. Its capture was supposed to happen on D-Day itself. But it would take nearly 6 weeks of brutal, grinding combat before Caen finally fell. The British and Canadian divisions, positioned along the eastern flank of the Allied front, bore the responsibility of taking Caen. But they didn't just face scattered German units. They were up against some of the most experienced, fanatical, and heavily equipped divisions the Wehrmacht could field, the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, and Panzerlehr, among others. The Germans understood Caen's importance. Holding it would prevent the Allies from breaking into open country. So they dug in, layer after layer of fortified positions, hidden tanks, machine gun nests, and minefields. The Germans did not retreat. They counterattacked. Operation Perch, the first major push toward Caen, stalled in hedgerows and enemy fire. A British armored column did manage a flanking maneuver near Villiers-Bocage, but it was ambushed and shattered by German Tiger tanks commanded by Ace Michael Wittmann. The Allies were forced to withdraw. Realizing Caen wouldn't fall through maneuver alone, the Allies changed tactics. In late June, they launched Operation Epsom, a broad offensive aiming to encircle Caen from the west. The British advanced under heavy artillery and air cover, managing to cross the Odin River, but German reserves rushed in to stop them. Casualties mounted on both sides. Still, Caen held. For the Germans, holding Caen came at a price. Hitler insisted on keeping his armored divisions near the British sector, fearing an Allied breakout there. This obsession worked in the Allies' favor. It pinned down elite German forces, preventing them from counterattacking the American sector further west. On July 7, the Allies launched Operation Charnwood, a direct assault on the city. Bombers dropped thousands of tons of explosives, turning northern Caen into rubble. British and Canadian infantry fought house by house, clearing ruins filled with snipers and machine gunners. By July 9, they controlled the northern half of the city. The Germans had withdrawn south of the Orne River. Still, Caen wasn't completely theirs. To finish the job, the Allies prepared Operation Goodwood, one of the largest tank offensives in Western Europe. Hundreds of British tanks rolled forward on July 18, preceded by a devastating aerial bombardment. Progress was made, but at a high cost. The Germans absorbed the blow and held much of the high ground beyond Caen. Even so, the tide was turning. The focus on Caen had kept the German armor fixed in place. And in the American sector, a storm was gathering, one that would break the stalemate and tear open the front. While British and Canadian forces were locked in bitter combat around Caen, the Americans had slowly been pushing inland from the western beaches. Their progress had been frustratingly slow. The region, known as the Bocage, was a nightmare, dense hedgerows, narrow lanes, and countless ambush points. Every field was a fortress. Every tree line, a potential death trap. But the Americans adapted. Infantrymen used explosives to breach hedgerows. Engineers designed tanks fitted with metal tusks, nicknamed Rhino tanks, that could plow through the earthen walls. Tactics evolved under fire. Patience became a weapon. By late July, the time had come to punch through. The plan was called Operation Cobra, a massive breakout from the Normandy countryside. The idea was simple but devastating: smash a hole in the German lines with overwhelming force, then pour tanks and infantry through the gap. General Omar Bradley, commander of the U.S. First Army, waited for the right weather and enemy disposition. When the Germans finally overextended themselves trying to plug gaps elsewhere, he struck. On July 25, over 3,000 Allied aircraft bombarded a narrow section of the German front near the town of St. Lo. The results were catastrophic. German positions were obliterated, entire units vaporized or left dazed and leaderless. Unfortunately, some American units were also caught in the chaos. Friendly fire incidents claimed hundreds of lives, including high-ranking officers like Lieutenant General Leslie McNair. But when the smoke cleared, the ground was open. American infantry surged forward, followed by armored columns. The German defenses buckled. Their infantry, exhausted and disorganized, could not hold. The panzer divisions, pinned near Caen by Hitler's obsession with the British front, were too far away to respond in time. Within days, the Americans had broken through. What followed was a race, one the Germans were not prepared to win. The US 7 and 8 Corps fanned out, capturing towns and road junctions at dizzying speed. German rear units, already depleted, fell into confusion. By early August, American forces had reached Avranches, opening the way into Brittany and turning the German flank. The breakout had finally come. The German high command scrambled. Hitler refused to authorize an orderly retreat. Instead, he ordered a counterattack, the infamous Operation Luttich, a last-ditch attempt to cut off the advancing Americans near Mordain. But the Allies had air superiority. Every movement the Germans made was watched, targeted, and destroyed from above. The counterattack failed. And now, with German armor committed and overextended, the Allies had a golden opportunity to strike a killing blow. The trap was being set. 2 Allied armies, 1 American and 1 Canadian, would move to encircle the German 7th Army. The target, a narrow corridor near the town of Falaise. If they could close it in time, the German presence in Normandy would be shattered. The final phase of the Normandy campaign was about to begin, not with a frontal assault, but with a trap. By mid-August 1944, the Germans in Normandy were in retreat, but not in collapse, not yet. The Allies had them on the back foot, but a decisive blow had still not landed. That opportunity came with the closing of the Falaise Pocket, the last act in the Normandy campaign. After the success of Operation Cobra, American forces under General Patton swung eastward in a wide arc. At the same time, British and Canadian units, having finally broken out of Caen, pushed south toward Falaise. The plan was to trap the German 7th Army and elements of the 5th Panzer Army in a narrow corridor, a noose tightening with each passing day. But it was not easy. The Germans, sensing the danger, began pulling back, too late. Hitler, as usual, refused to allow a full retreat until it was nearly impossible. Orders were contradictory, often suicidal. Some German units tried to break out. Others dug in, obeying orders to fight to the last. The result was chaos. Between August 18 and 21, the Allies closed the trap. At its tightest point, the Falaise Gap was only a few miles wide. Artillery pounded the German columns attempting to escape. Fighter bombers patrolled the skies, striking at will. Roads were littered with burned-out vehicles, twisted metal, and the bodies of men and horses. The destruction was near total. Over 50,000 German troops were trapped. Around 10,000 were killed, another 40,000 captured. Those who did escape were often without heavy weapons, food, or morale. The once proud formations of the Wehrmacht were reduced to battered survivors limping eastward. For the Allies, the victory was total, but not without criticism. Some historians argue the gap could have been closed sooner, had Montgomery and Patton coordinated more aggressively. A few thousand Germans did manage to slip out before the trap shut entirely. But it hardly mattered. The German position in France had been irreparably broken. The Normandy campaign was over. In just over 2 months, the Allies had landed on the most fortified coastline in history, shattered the Atlantic Wall, and destroyed Germany's Western Field Army. Paris would fall within days, liberated by the French resistance and Free French forces under General Leclerc. The road to the Rhine was now open. But victory had come at a high price. The Allies suffered over 200,000 casualties in Normandy. Thousands of men were dead, wounded, or missing. Whole towns had been reduced to rubble. French civilians had paid dearly. For every mile gained, blood had been spilled. And for the Germans, Normandy was more than a military disaster, it was a symbol. Hitler's grip on Western Europe had been broken. The myth of German invincibility, shattered. The Allies had paid in blood, steel, and fire. But they had won. Normandy was not the end of the war. But it was the beginning of the end.